Hi, everybody. We're the Skeleton Crew, coming at you now from a new place.
One of us is.
One of us, but the one who's speaking.
One of
That's
you.
one of me.
You!
Yes. One of our audience may have moved in the interim.
And we know.
Hello.
We track you.
Yes, this is going to be the new space that I record in for the time being. This is kind of a transitional episode. I haven't gotten it all set up yet. Some of the paleo art's going to be behind me that you're all used to, so fear not. The space has changed, but it will not change that much in the grand scheme of things. The wall is red, and the desk is now L-shaped, allowing me to rest my arms on the desk at all times, which is very nice. I have to put one of my arms under this microphone, but that's okay. We're talking about a dinosaur again today. This is very unusual, and I know that many viewers of the channel might be shocked at the sudden change in content creation strategy. But fear not, this will remain our strategy. We will continue talking about dinosaurs and other prehistoric life. Today we're talking about Pachycephalosaurus, a dome-headed dinosaur that has been featured in the Jurassic Park franchise for quite a while now. I don't think it was ever mentioned in the first book or movie, right? It's not on any of the tubes. No. So it enters the canon in The Lost World. Mm-hmm. And it's one of my favorite dinosaurs in that movie. It
has a great moment.
It's a great moment, a great scene. I kind of wish it had done more.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway.
Absolutely. I really like the bit when definitely not good value brand Bob Barker talks about the headbutting, and the dude in the background gets hit through the car.
Yeah,
that's a little funny blink and you miss it moment. That if you're not looking for it in the background, he goes out the other side of the car after he gets hit, and it's very funny.
It's one of the actual... unfortunately, we're already on our first stun lock. We haven't even introduced ourselves yet.
The animal!
Well, it is. Yeah. So maybe it's not a stun lock. It's something that I think Steven Spielberg's direction often is overlooked for, is that he's very good at using environmental cues to indicate things like power or strength or anything of that effect. I think one example is how do you convey how large and powerful this animal is? Have it headbutt somebody through a vehicle. And this is pre-CGI being able to do that. That man was on cables and was pulled through the car. I've seen the behind the scenes. It's something he does a lot, I think in Jaws, right? When they use those yellow barrels to try to buoy the shark to the surface, and they say that one should do it, and you just start seeing them kind of surfacing periodically, but just when you're told as an audience these are going to hold them at the surface, seeing them go underwater is a beautiful illustration of that sort of stuff. Spielberg uses the environment and the props in ways that a lot of other directors don't, and I think that's something that's underappreciated in his filmography. A lot of moments from Saving Private Ryan like that as well, just the size and scale of dust clouds from explosions, the way the bullet impacts it. A lot of beautiful stuff. What?
I'm sorry, I was just I don't remember Pachycephalosaurus and Saving Private Ryan.
It's one of the most tragic scenes.
He was fighting for his country. That's how they got into the bunker off of Omaha Beach. They got to the door and they were like, all right, Sergeant Seffi, ram him. And of course the Pachycephalosaurus was holding a flamethrower.
Oh yeah. Little did you know that both Jurassic Park and Saving Private Ryan were Steven Spielberg subtly testing the waters to see if the public was ready for a Dino D-Day movie.
If only the
deep
game
cut for people who know about what Dino D-Day is.
Oh yeah. Wait a minute. I do know what Dino D-Day is. It was the video game. Yes.
Yeah, it's the Source Engine game.
I've never played it.
It's bad.
Should we play it on the channel?
I don't know if you can.
I'm not sure if it's still available. If it is, we definitely should, because I think
own it.
I think that now this is a stun lock. I think that one of the abilities is it's a weird roster of critters. I think that there's a Desmodasuchus with a 20mm cannon on it for some reason.
There's so cool.
There's a Dilophosaurus that can just throw goats at people. It's really, really funny. There's a Protoceratops. I forget what he does. I think that one has a 30 cal on it.
Looks like the last update from their blog was in 2016, but that doesn't mean you can't still play it.
I wonder if it's still playable.
Yeah, wait, I'm sorry. The about page, the opening paragraph for the lore. Adolf Hitler has succeeded in resurrecting dinosaurs. The reptilian horde has trampled Europe and the Mediterranean. This. Okay. Anyway, I'm Dr. James Napoli. I'm a research instructor at Stony Brook University's Renaissance School of Medicine in New York. This is the first video we're recording after I've relocated from my new job. And I'm in the process of writing my initial lectures so that I can start teaching human anatomy to medical students and PA students.
While you're introducing yourself, do you want to actually give us a tiny bit about why you, a paleontologist, are teaching a human medical anatomy
You know
course?
what's funny? I actually thought about that, and then I was like, oh no, everybody will be annoyed that I'm taking up too much time to do this. But thank you for giving me the invitation. Yeah, no, I think so too.
I get the question all the time when I apply to those jobs and tell my family. They're like, why would you do that?
Right. Well, so basically, anatomy remains a pretty core component of medical education, right? There's a lot of medicine that doesn't involve the actual gross anatomy of the body. I would say that if you're not a surgeon, you're generally interfacing with it fairly little. But the physical structure of the human body is an important thing to understand if you're practicing medicine, right? This is like the arena in which all of the, I think in medical school, they often use the kind of the analogy that if like all of the biochemical interactions, drug interactions and everything are specific battles, like the anatomy is the theater in which the war is taking place. I think that might zoom out a little bit too much. Like anatomy plays a pretty important role in the development of a lot of disorders, but it remains the case that medical students need to learn anatomy. Generally speaking, the people best qualified to teach anatomy are actually paleontologists because it's the only real remaining field of study that this and like experimental biomechanics, I would say, are really the only fields of study. And paleontology here also including paleoanthropology, to be clear, because paleoanthropologists also can definitely teach anatomy and often do. But these are the only fields of study that really deal with gross anatomy in the day-to-day as a topic of serious study, right? If you're doing like molecular phylogenetics, you're doing very important work. The anatomy of the animal doesn't actually really matter anymore for a lot of that kind of study. So paleontologists are often hired by medical schools to teach anatomy to medical students and other students in different medical specialties, because we research anatomy, we research the physical structure of bodies, and so we're among the best qualified people in higher education to teach these kinds of courses. I should also note, these are generally some of the best kinds of gigs you can get as a paleontologist. I would say the only thing I would really prefer to this as a career endpoint would be like being a curator of a major museum. But anatomy jobs afford you a lot of research freedom. It's a good teaching schedule. They're generally well compensated because it's an important thing that you're doing, teaching anatomy to medical students. So all in all, it's a great kind of component of our field. It's something a lot of people don't expect, but it's a cool thing. And I'm excited to be contributing a little bit more to society at large by teaching people who will become medical professionals. I TA'd human anatomy as a graduate student twice at Mount Sinai's School of Medicine, the Icon School of Medicine, which was across Central Park from the AMNH. And this past cycle here, my first cohort of students has gotten their medical degrees, and I'm seeing a lot of them celebrate on social media. And it's really amazing to see what they've done, because I met them at the beginning of medical school, and many of them are now going into neurosurgery or pediatrics, obstetrics, orthopedics, psychiatry, all these things. And, I know that I was a pretty important part of their education, only one of a team of instructors, to be sure. But it's still nice to know that I was able to play a role in their education and be kind of doing something that's outside strictly paleontological research. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm super excited to start my new job. It's obviously a pretty big transition with a lot of new responsibility. Like, I got my first email inviting me to a faculty meeting.
Ooh.
And that nearly gave me a heart attack.
Scary.
Yes, I'm invited to a faculty meeting, and not because I'm being grilled by the faculty. I'm the faculty. It's a faculty meeting.
Do any other faculty run a YouTube channel? That must be bizarre.
No, they don't. Anyway, I've now waffled on at length about my new career position, and that's very exciting for me. But there are other members of the skeleton crew, and now I'll turn the floor over to them.
It wasn't waffling. I asked you.
Turn the table onto the floor.
I will flip the table onto the other's crewmates.
No, I wanted to draw attention to it because it's something that like I get asked a lot because I'm in the stage of the PhD where I am applying to jobs, and when I tell people I'm applying to teach anatomy, they're like, "Why? You're not you're not that kind of doctor." I get that a lot. But that is why, is that we work on anatomy all the time. Anywho, I don't have an adult job. I am currently still a PhD candidate at the American Museum of Natural History.
Hi, my name is Scott Johnston. I do have an adult job, but it hasn't changed since last we spoke. Hi, I hope you're doing well. Drink some water. You look dehydrated. But my job is that I am this is to the audience, okay, but also you.
Well, specifically me.
It's really to James. But my real job that I have not changed is I am the vertebrate paleontology fossil preparator and technician at Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology. And I don't get invited to faculty because I am staff.
Rip.
Do you get to go to staff meetings?
I have to go to staff meetings, as a matter of fact.
Well, the normal next person in line is in Greenwich, and we don't by that mean the Wizard of Oz. We mean a city in Connecticut. I don't know. There was a trailer for Wicked before Furiosa, and I tweeted about it because it aggravated me so much because I don't think it looks bad. I don't think it looks great. But the issue is that Wicked is a musical. And I like
that.
Wicked.
Is a huge issue with Wicked.
I like Wicked as a musical. It's a good show. I've seen it at least once. I may have seen it more. I don't remember. But it's certainly not being marketed as a musical. And you know what
else? Are they doing the thing again?
Yeah. The song, there's at least, the song Defying Gravity is playing in the background. Because that's
if it wasn't, I would be like, what are they doing?
And it sounds like it's going to be really good, musically at least. But they're certainly not marketing it as a musical, which is the same thing they did with the recent remake of Mean Girls, which was not just a remake of Mean Girls, but was in fact a film adaptation of the Mean Girls stage musical.
And with the Willy Wonka movie recently, too.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, if you're going to adapt a stage musical to film, you should not do that if you're ashamed to then market it as a musical. If you're trying to trick people into seeing this, and then they're like, oh, it's a musical. Don't do that. I'm Dalton Meyer. I'm a PhD candidate at Yale University, which, as I near having my age have a 3 in the tens place, I will consider just a different kind of adult job.
I'm sorry I'm laughing so hard, but that is the 3 in the tens place is coming for us all.
Oh, it's already gotten me.
I don't like it.
I had a very specific thought about it, like earlier today for no reason. I just had a thought. I was like, oh, this year is 27, isn't it?
Is it?
For me.
Yeah, so you're already too old for Leo?
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, that's good. It
took me a minute. I don't know what you were saying.
Dalton,
Sorry,
just to check, you've been recording, right?
Yes, I have been recording. And I was going
good.
to...
I realized
I was going to flop into Together with the Skeleton Crew, and then a burp just erupted in my mouth. Together, we're
the Skeleton Crew. Yeah, we sure are. And today we're not the only boneheads in the chat or the channel or the video or whatever I should say here.
You can say chat. They can be in chat with us.
We're in the chat.
Boneheads in chat.
Speaking of Boneheads, did anyone else ever watch Boneheads Detectives of the Paleo World as a kid?
What?
It was like a children's show on the Discovery Kids Network, which I didn't have cable, so I only really watched it growing up when I went to like my aunt's house because they had cable, and it was on like late at night. And they mostly just like, I think it was just kind of other documentaries, like clips from them kind of put together with like some kids helping to like narrate the flow. Like a lot of reused scenes from Walking with Dinosaurs.
Huh.
I may have... No, I don't think I watched this one. What's funny is, so I'm in my mom's basement. I grew up near Stony Brook University, so I'm living back with my family. This will surely be mentioned at some other point in another video, so I'll just get it out of the way now, so it doesn't feel like it's a shameful thing I was trying to hide. Yes, I don't live in the basement, to be clear. I live in the real house. I work in the basement. This is an important distinction to me. But one other thing that's in this basement with me here are VHSs of pretty much every dinosaur documentary I had growing up. Which, by the way, I'm planning to digitize. And perhaps we could do some channel activities with these really old dinosaur documentaries. And I'm not talking about only the ones that are well known. I've got some old and kind of weird ones.
Do you happen to have a good VHS of the American version of Walking with Dinosaurs? Because I've been trying to find that.
Ooh. Taped directly from the original broadcast in 2000.
I think I still have mine from like the original broadcast as well, with all those old commercials and stuff too, and it's great. It's walk down memory lane.
Yeah, I'm looking into ways to digitize VHSs like economically, and then what I would like to do is just have a library of all these old things. But anyway, we should release the Pachycephalosaurus.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Release the Pachycephalosaurus cut. I'll do that.
Release the thick-headed gentlemen.
Here they come.
Or ladies, I guess.
I really like that they have socks.
They do.
I just like them. I just think they're neat.
I just think they're neat too.
They are pretty neat.
The neatness levels are off the charts here.
We've got ourselves some Pachycephalosauruses here, and I am more pleased with them than I thought. When I was making the enclosure, I kind of forgot what the design looked like, and then I was pleased. Spoiler alert. With set design.
When we were preparing for the video, I had mentioned to the guys that I think that Pachycephalosaurus is, like, as a concept, not good as like an animal. But as we were watching, or like as they were kind of walking around, in the meantime, I like how they look in this game specifically.
Yeah, I have a lot of nostalgia for this design.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Same.
we keep saying we're going to try to make these videos about the design of the animals, and we've just had a meeting about that again today. So I'm just going to open by talking about the design. I like the design. It's definitely retro, but in a way that doesn't feel out of line. Like, I feel like if this were a current depiction of this animal, we wouldn't hate it. They're like minor design details and cues that I think we would alter.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's a pretty good Pachycephalosaurus. I'm not looking at things like the arrangement of the nodes on the back of the skull. I don't really know that offhand, and I don't know if we even have a complete Pachycephalosaurus complement of these. Like, we've got a couple of skulls that are pretty good, but I don't know if they're fully complete.
I thought the AMH one is pretty good.
It's pretty good. I don't know if it's maybe missing one or two because it's got some restoration with plaster, but I don't know. I don't know offhand. I don't work on these animals, but at the very least, it looks like reasonable.
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest, like, not to get right into like nitpicks or anything, I think that looking at photos of the skulls, that there's typically not nodes like right in the middle, like they're kind of on either side, and there's kind of a gap at the midline. That maybe is only in the one that I'm looking at, though. It might not.
That
be
would make sense. I mean, given that, like, generally speaking, like ceratopsians don't have like epiparietals, I guess, or those would be epioccipitals, I guess.
It would be an epiparietal in the middle.
Epiparietal, I was right in the first. Right there, right on the midline.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't yet know where my mic stand is relative to my head, and I've collided with it.
We heard.
Yeah,
it made a lovely dong.
Good. I'm glad.
Was that from the mic stand or your head?
That was from my head hitting the mic stand.
Oh.
No, I was saying the hollow dong noise. Was that?
Oh, it was my headset hitting that.
I was making a joke that your head was hollow. Let's.
I'm not allowing you to do so.
Clearly.
I'm sorry, Scott. Please continue.
No, that was just the joke. I didn't have a continuation.
No, I was gonna yes and your point about the epiossifications, which are like, I don't know if we know confidently how these are developing, but again, like, epidermal ossifications in archosaurs tend to be bilaterally paired, right? Like, not midline. We say this a lot because there's always this tendency to put things right down the midline, and I think the only things we know of for dinosaurs that do that are the keratinous spikes that sauropods have.
Yeah, and Ceratosaurus.
And the duckbills have.
And Ceratosaurus.
Yes, Ceratosaurus is the weird one that has a midline osteoderm row. But generally...
and hadrosaurs.
With hadrosaurs, are those osteoderms? I thought
They're
those
not
were also
osteoderms.
keratinous.
They're
keratinous.
Yes. I'm just saying that also on hadrosaurs, they have midline stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So, okay, I've got a picture of the AMNH Pachycephalosaurus skull up right now. So, Dalton, could we...
Let me find one in the sun, and then...
Yeah, could we engage
I don't even think we need
the
to.
camera?
We can just zoom in.
So, there are... In the real specimen, there are 2 large epiossifications on the nose, but they are closer to the tip of the snout than this.
Like down here instead of like up there.
Yeah, they're about halfway closer. Like that kind of... You see that dark banding?
Like there.
Yeah, they should be about there.
Okay.
There is kind of a midline spike sticking forward, but then there are 2 larger spikes right above the nostrils that stick laterally. So, like, the arrangement of the ossifications at the front of the snout on this model is not, like, perfect, although it's definitely reminiscent of the stuff the real animal has. I think the only issue I could see is if we could go to the side. Maybe the other side for more direct sun.
Good idea.
There are it looks like there are too many. While I'm not an expert on these...
On the back or on the front?
On the back.
Because on the back, I think part of the problem, if you're looking at the same picture of the skull at the AMH that I am, is that it's kind of at a 3/4 angle.
I have a lateral view, too, from one of the papers.
Okay.
And it's kind of the same. So there's like... You see how, starting from kind of behind the adductor chamber, Dalton, there's like a large one?
Yeah. Like that
Then
one?
immediately posterior to that, there's kind of a stack of like... They're kind of like offset, but one's lower and one's higher. The higher one should be there. The lower one probably should not, based on this specimen. So there's kind of like 2 at the same level going back, and then there's an array of 4 toward the back that are kind of in a rosette. Where you've got 1 forward, 1 up, 1 back, and 1 down.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing the same image from the paper.
Yeah, so I think there's probably just too many nodes being depicted here. It's not a huge issue. They do also seem to get, though, or maybe they don't explicitly color them, there seem to be a row of small ones kind of over the orbit.
Yeah, I see that.
Where they're kind of like little and squamous rather, not squamish. And I think that you can probably, like, you get some indication of them on the model.
Mm-hmm. I would also almost, and again, also not an expert on these animals, but looking at this image, it gives me the vibe that kind of at least what would be continuous with the textured surface of the dome kind of goes down onto the front of the face a little bit, up to where these nodes should be.
That would be my indication. It's not really like, I think we always want to make it a hat, but it's like, it's the top of the head and the forehead.
Yeah. I'll also say, from looking at the lateral view of this guy's skull, I would not be surprised if this is based on the skull at the Oxford Museum, because it kind of looks a little bit... I'll just throw an image in chat for you guys, so no one needs to look for it. It looks like those ones on the snout are a little bit just placed a little bit closer to what it looks like they are in the model in game.
Yeah.
That like pair of them near the eye and the pair of them down by the end of the snout.
Do we know what specimen that is based on?
I don't. At least I don't.
I was going to say that doesn't... Not that I really know what I'm looking at, but that looks more like Stiggy to me.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I know we'll get to that, but you know what I mean? Like, at a glance...
No, that was also my thought, Amelia.
Okay, good. I'm not stupid. But that's my hesitation is that, like, Pachycephalosaurus proper, like, I think of the AMNH one, because that's absolutely its own thing.
Right.
You know what I'm not... You know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. No, but the AMNH skull is, like, the only good one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also why I think this one, Scott, is potentially based on something else or a composite.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I will also say, now, while we're looking at the head, not to just only focus on the dome, one of the things that's always just rubbed me the wrong way a little bit is that the beak is way too hooked on this guy.
And narrow.
Yeah.
They've got a fairly broad snout.
They have a fairly broad... they have a fairly broad beak. Like, the snout itself is much more narrow, at least from front view. Like, that might just be an artifact of the lens that's always been taken, these photos have been taken with. But, like, it ends pretty narrow, but it is kind of just, like, chopped off at the end, like if you cut the corner off a triangle. But, like, mainly it seems like the beak on Pachycephalosaurus is kind of like heart-shaped. Like, it kind of has two lobes that come inward at the symphysis in the middle.
I mean, the AMH one doesn't quite do that.
There's potentially a taxonomic issue happening here, because there's two things to say. One, if you've watched our Stygimoloch video, you will know that the taxonomy of these animals is quite complicated and a matter of debate. But two, the fossil record of Pachycephalosaurs is not good. You know, there's good and there's not good, and this is not good. It's a very... Because, like, oh, yes.
Just the AMH snout, I realized, is probably plaster, looking at the color of it.
I think it is.
Believe it. I think it is.
It is. The AMH one, it's a gorgeous skull, but it's specifically missing.
It's missing,
another tip.
No, I just had to look at it again.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. But, like, you know, the identity of the sandy specimen, right, which is the one you generally see in museums right now, not certain, right? It depends on ongoing research. At least one of the epiossifications on the right side of the AMH skull is also, it looks like the most anterior of them is also plaster.
Yeah.
Which is neat. But yeah, it is a difficult taxonomy to work out, because the preserved material of these animals is almost overwhelmingly just skull domes.
Yeah. Which, speaking of, and we've been talking about the head so much, what does its name mean?
Oh, very quickly. Thick-headed lizard. If you couldn't guess.
From Wyoming, specifically.
From Wyoming, yeah. If it's Wyomingensis, which is it the genus? There's a weirdness with I'm remembering a time where I thought the AMH one was the holotype of Wyomingensis, but it's apparently not.
No, so it's a fun little story.
Yeah.
The type specimen of Wyomingensis is a specimen at the Smithsonian that was originally named Troodon wyomingensis.
Oh no!
Because of the long-standing difficulty with distinguishing troodontid teeth from pachycephalosaur teeth. Right, and this is something else we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, this debate, like, I was talking with Christian Kammerer, who's the research curator at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, one of the days before I left North Carolina. And we were talking about progress in paleontology, and he said, James, I don't know if you realize this, but when I was a child, we didn't really understand the difference between pachycephalosaurs and troodontids confidently. Like, that was still a thing people were working out. The progress on that's more recent than a lot of people think, because also Christian's not an old man. Like, he's a younger guy. So it was Troodon wyomingensis. Then Barnum Brown and Eric Schleicher, who were working, they did a couple of really, really impressive anatomical studies back in the 40s. Like, I think Brown and Schleicher kind of set the standard for what a modern style anatomical monograph should be with their Protoceratops monograph, which is, like, even now, there's not a lot of comparisons to material at that point because a lot of the material wasn't yet discovered. But, like, reading it, I was just like, this would stand now. This would be a good paper today if it were published. It's really, really detailed. They were working on a lot of the ornithischian dinosaurs that had been collected by the AMH in the decades prior, and they made the AMH skull the type of Pachycephalosaurus grangeri.
I was going to ask
which
about
was
that, yeah.
Named after, what's his first name? Granger. Might be...
I haven't a clue.
He's not mentioned on the Wikipedia page, which I was just referencing.
I'm trying to pull up the paper.
I forget his first name, but Granger was another like paleontologist who was working at that time period. So Amelia, you're right that the AMNH skull is the type specimen of Pachycephalosaurus, but it is not the type specimen of Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis, which has priority over, because they realized that this Pachycephalosaurus, or this Troodon wyomingensis was Pachycephalosaurus. It's the same situation that happened to Tarbosaurus, by the way.
Oh, really?
Because, yes, so Tarbosaurus was originally named Tyrannosaurus batar, based on a fully mature individual. And a subadult was named Tarbosaurus ephraimovi. And when the taxonomy was sorted out, it was determined that the animal was generically distinct from Tyrannosaurus rex, so the combination became Tarbosaurus, which was the oldest available genus name for that group of organisms. But then batar, because that was the oldest available species name for that group of organisms. Like, they don't always have to go together. Now, I will say, and I have not had time to read into this, so there's a Galton and Seuss paper that I'm going to try to pull up. I don't know how we determined that Wyomingensis and Grangeri were the same species, and I do wonder if maybe we should be using Grangeri.
Want to give it a skim real quick?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'll let you guys weigh in here. Or start talking about something.
I'm trying to just find the Granger, the Granger nameger. And I'm not succeeding. I don't know.
Dalton, that was a grade A bit right there. That was very good.
Granger danger.
I hope that his friend said that whenever he came on.
Yeah, the front of the AMNH specimen sculpted. There's more of it than I even kind of thought, frankly. It's decently complete skull.
It's everything but the tip.
And
right?
a few like little bits and bobs, but yeah. It's just in a paper, Troodont dinosaurs. The origin of the dome of the Troodont dinosaur skull. That's so cool. I love that.
Dome-headed Troodontids.
Yeah, and also I will say while James is looking up things, that I was looking at other depictions of Pachycephalosaurus, and I think that we've only recently found the predentary of Pachycephalosaurus, and even some other depictions, like the prehistoric planet Pachycephalosaurus has a broader beak than this one does, but it doesn't have quite as much of like the kind of heart shaped as some depictions do. So I don't really know what is the... I don't know if there's any confidently referred it's not predentary. What's the name for it?
Premaxilla.
Well, don't they
it's
have...
a premaxilla.
Is it just a premaxilla? Those only ceratopsians have the rostral, right? Okay. Yeah. I don't know if there's a confidently referable premaxilla for Pachycephalosaurus. Just seeing some photos of the actual sandy specimen and not the casts that are mounted, but like photos of the actual specimen, and then also looking at several kind of skeletals that people have made based off of that. It looks like that one also doesn't preserve the premaxilla. And it may be that we kind of, the best thing we have to go off of is the individuals that are occasionally referred to as dracorex.
Yeah.
For the shape of the tip of the face.
Well, there is
another.
So I've come up with what seems to be a maybe disturbing conclusion.
Oh no.
Well, it's not disturbing. I'm sorry.
Is it real mammal hours? They've lost the premaxilla.
No. No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the taxonomy again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically, Galton and Seuss kind of, I think, just consider all of the material that had been called Pachycephalosaurus as belonging to one species.
Okay.
And they interpret the differences between them as being attributable to both age and sexual dimorphism. And And this is based on analogy with not Stygimoloch. Although Stygimoloch was also named in this paper.
Stegosaurus?
Stegosaurus, which has, like, there are a number of domes that had also been interpreted in that way. What I don't know is if all of those things are still considered Stegosaurus, because there's been kind of an explosion of like dome taxa known from Canada. And if those are not all still Stegosaurus, I do wonder if it's possible that some of the species of Pachycephalosaurus will come back in the future. I'll say again here, I know that there is research ongoing on a lot of this stuff. And I don't know what a lot of the conclusions will be. So this is a kind of an active area of uncertainty. I really don't know for sure. But it seems that they just considered the differences between, like, the Wyomingensis type dome and the much more complete AM&H skull as being attributable to ontology. And that it's probably one taxon. I think the safest thing to do, I mean, without seeing the Smithsonian specimen, I can't really know how complete it is and how good it is, but if it's not super great, I probably would have stuck with Granger eye and kind of, like, said that Wyomingensis was not fully diagnostic. But it is in this paper. It's not fantastic, but I can see how it's referable to the same animal. But so, okay. I mean, the end result here is Pachycephalosaur taxonomy is hard. The only really, really good skull attributable to Pachycephalosaurus was the one that was named Granger eye. But they're all considered to represent the same species today, which I think seems reasonable in light of the actual material we have for them. Especially if you're of the persuasion that, like, Stegosaurus, or I'm sorry, not Stegosaurus, Stygimoloch and Dracorex are not juveniles of that animal, in which case the available sample is much smaller.
And it does,
but even if you include them, the available sample is not big.
It does look like the very broad beak and the very broad premaxilla is probably coming from Dracorex, because that is preserved on the holotype of Dracorex, and it has that broad kind of swooping shape. And I, again, without taking a stance in any way, I think that's a reasonable basis to make reconstructions of Pachycephalosaurus, because it's just the only one. It's the only premaxilla that we have, to my knowledge, of a Hellcrete Pachycephalosaur.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I guess now that we're talking about a little bit of the history of study of Pachycephalosaurus, one of the things that has kind of always been a question for me is that, I'll rephrase that. One of the things that I've always found interesting about Pachycephalosaurus is that the first specimens of Pachycephalosaurus were thought to be a troodon, or a troodontid, and were named Troodon wyomingensis. And ever since then, there has kind of been this hanging hypothesis of maybe Pachycephalosaurus was omnivorous, because the teeth are relatively, or not even relatively, they're pretty damn different from the front of the snout to the back. And in the back, they're a whole lot more traditionally, like, leaf-shaped, herbivorous styled and pretty small. And at the front, they seem to be a whole lot more spiky and blade-like. And this is an idea that has had some serious staying power for being something that was always kind of a, like, little fun fact that I remember reading in, like, dinosaur books growing up, to more recently being depicted in
Paleopines?
In the game Paleopines, where the Pachycephalosaurus is omnivorous, and the one that I have in my game is in a paddock with a bunch of carnivores and is eating carnivore chow, and it feels really weird to me. It feels like I'm raising this Pachycephalosaurus to be like the horses of Diomedes, like being trained to eat men. But like, I don't know. It's always been a weird thing that gets talked about every once in a while. And I did a little bit of digging into this, and basically, I think that this might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, rest of crew, but this might be another good example of something that we talk about relatively frequently, which is herbivory as a spectrum, maybe? Or also maybe they were using these teeth for other things. Because some very incredibly herbivorous animals can have some very scary looking teeth that weren't used for killing things. I don't think Chinese water deer are using them to rip out the throats of smaller prey animals or anything. That's an extreme example, but
no, it is, and it's, I think, one of those little enigmas that will remain a mystery until we do different analyses and have been done, because we can hypothesize on a number of different functions for these teeth, and they can range from, like, perhaps they were biting each other with them when they fought, which we'll talk about fighting in a bit, but we know these guys are scrappers, to potentially incorporating meat in their diet, and there are potential ways to investigate that. I don't know if I don't think any have been done. So, potential open avenue for future research of doing isotopic analyses on pachycephalosaur teeth to investigate what they're eating.
I don't believe so. No, not yet.
Because in a very real answer. Because in a very real sense, you are what you eat, and you can take isotopic samples from fossilized teeth to get signals that indicate generally what type of things that the animal was eating. I wonder what microwear would show as well. But I mean, hell, if they're eating plants and meat, I don't know. I don't know. It's just an interesting avenue of study that I would like to see more work done on. Because if these guys were omnivorous, that would be very, very interesting, and more omnivorous than just like the way that horses are.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, there's a number of theropods that are omnivorous, right? Or inferred to be to some degree omnivorous. I would not be surprised if one of the skins at some point explored that as a mode of life.
Yeah, but then there's also like we said, there's a bunch of herbivores that are definitely herbivorous or primarily herbivorous. That, like, I mean, hell, the one that is way less extreme than water deer is camels. They have some pretty gnarly, very, very carnivorous looking teeth at the front of their mouth, and oh god, I mean, just don't get bit by one.
No, do not. But yeah, I mean, I do kind of like the idea that maybe they were biting each other. Like maybe this was part of how they fought intraspecifically, was just kind of ripping into each other with those teeth if they weren't headbutting. Speaking of which,
perhaps
yes, we should talk about. Yes, they were. That's the debate.
We're done.
We've solved it. I would like to say something very briefly to introduce the debate, and then Scott, you did a lot of research, so I'll let you go off king.
Perfect.
There's been a historical debate about whether these animals were using their domes for headbutting. I believe that was the original interpretation, is that they were something like a dinosaurian muskox or bighorn sheep. So when originally found, I don't know what paper this originates from, but there has been this long-standing conversation and popular depiction of these animals as doing intra-specific, rather, combat, probably associated with breeding, where the males would like back up and then ram into each other as some sort of dominance display to attract the mate. Alternatively, I've heard suggestions that they were using their dome not for intra-specific combat, but to like ram into predators. I could see that being possible, but as we've discussed in one of our earliest videos, usually weaponry is intended for intra-specific combat, not inter-specific combat. That's the case that's been made for ankylosaur tails, and so that seems a little more far-fetched for these guys. That said, the conversation about the headbutting abilities of these animals has been quite extensive. And Scott, you did the most reading on this, so please tell us things.
Yes. So, yeah, this has been a debate for quite a while. I think a lot of it stems from like, this is a very battering ram coded animal. You just kind of look at it and you're like, golly gee, this man really looks like he has exactly one brain cell, and that brain cell is telling him to slam his big bulbous forehead into anything that he think looks at him wrong. And that it's always been this interesting back and forth, that there have been a lot of conversations around like, well, maybe like a lot of them seem to stem from things like, well, the head shape isn't the best for that, because with things like, wow, they're really all congregating off at the sides. Yeah. Jeez. They just have a tendency to do this on this map. What's wrong with them?
I don't know. I may have dispersed the plants that they eat poorly.
No.
Do you think they could be stupid?
I think they are stupid.
Look, of course they were. Yes.
Look, this animal was like 12 inches of solid bone and a tiny little cavity remaining for the brain, which I'm sure was defending like its territory like an occupied nation, just like a mountain tribe being invaded by an imperial power in antiquity. It's got spikes, it's got trenches, it's got flaming moats with alligators in it. It's like, you need to leave me just enough space to be a brain. That's essentially all it's got.
I wouldn't be surprised if there were, like, back in the Hell Creek, many instances of a Pachycephalosaurus seeing a weird looking tree and freaking out and charging at it. But so I think a lot of the kind of debate has come from basically that, like, yes, this thing looks like a battering ram. It looks like it was made to smash into things. But if you start thinking through the mechanics of that, it starts to I wouldn't say break down. It just more starts to show that that if they were doing this, they weren't doing it in exactly the same way that we do, that we see with extant headbutters. Mainly with things like muskox, with bighorn sheep and stuff. They have two projections that when they smash into each other, and it's easier seen in things like bighorn sheep, they tend to kind of cock their heads to the side a bit, kind of like a bit of an oblique angle, and then hit in a way that the horns slightly interlock and kind of keep them together for that impact. And with Pachycephalosaurus here, it's very domed, if not in some specimens almost peaked in the middle. And that would indicate, given like we don't know exactly what sort of integument was over these, in Prehistoric Kingdom, they show them as almost scaly, or like, which I thought was an interesting choice. I think that at least this design, where it's more, I guess, keratin, just reads a little more plausible to me. But
there's no evidence of keratin covering on those.
No evidence of keratin? Oh, okay. All right. No. So probably cornified something.
I would bet it's a cornified scale. I would tend to agree with the prehistoric planet.
Okay. All right.
Depiction.
Yeah.
Also, probably something that's easier to heal if they're really hitting each other.
It's fair,
right?
Yeah.
So like real skin as opposed to a keratin cover. I mean, not that keratin can't be healed and be regenerated, but you know.
No, that's a good point that I hadn't really considered. But yeah, so like probably some sort of cornified skin over top of this.
So they were like just literally bald.
Yeah,
I don't like that at all.
It's the joke that they say in
it's Friar
in the Lost
Tuck.
World when he's flipping through the manual trying to pronounce these dinosaur names. He was like the fat one with the bald spot, Friar Tuck.
Friar Tuck. I don't like it at all.
I love that.
But so these guys had just very domed, like I was saying, domed if not peaked heads. And if you were to take like two bowling balls and try to smash them together, they're going to be glancing off at different angles. So that was one of the hypotheses that or one of the like points that I'd heard people saying of, hey, maybe they weren't headbutting because they weren't able to get a really good solid like hit in like that. And also people had been saying that like, oh, while the dome is thick, it is brittle, and impact to the skull would cause a severe amount of damage that would just break the entire skull and leave the animal crippled, if not dead. That it was just a display structure. So there's an interesting paper that talks about exactly that, namely the evidence of injuries on the skulls of Pachycephalosaurs. This is distributions of cranial pathologies provide evidence for headbutting in dome-headed dinosaurs, by Joe Peterson et al. And Joe Peterson was one of the PIs who I worked with when I was doing some digging out at the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry near Price, Utah, in the summer before I got the AM&H job. I actually had my phone interview with John Flynn when I was waiting for my car to get repaired in the shop when I was staying at my cousin's place, because his fiance accidentally, and this was in Nebraska, his fiance accidentally backed into it when she was going to do her personal training job at like 4 a.m.
Oh, no.
But it was a tiny little, all right, or Stunlock for a second. It was a tiny little bump that she like barely touched it, and it was like parked outside her the driveway, and she just kind of like boop, kissed it and was like, oh no, and then like drove off and was going to go check to see if there was any damage, and then noticed that the car wasn't there anymore. It was in their front lawn. And so I remember getting woken up by my cousin Laz, and he was just like, hey Scott, you got to get up, your car's in the front lawn. And I was on a different planet coming to life. And I was like, I remember kind of just like coming into consciousness, seeing the Acura just sitting in the front lawn and just going, what the hell? And they're like, we tried to push it back and it won't move. And what ended up happening was,
Scott, what does this have to do with the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry, though? I don't understand. Oh, okay.
This is like an Abe Simpson story.
This was on the way there. I was driving there. Yes, I was driving there, and I was planning on this was the day I was going to have my interview with John Flynn, and I was like, I'll pull over at a McDonald's or something like that, and I'll connect to their Wi-Fi and do the interview in the parking lot or something. But yeah, I can cut this whole thing. We could just
No, it's fine. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was wondering, like, does your cousin live on the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry?
No. I was driving and like kind of island hopping between friends and relatives most of my way out to Utah.
I see. Okay.
So I wouldn't have to pay for hotels. I only did once in Denver. But so it turns out that little love tap was enough to break both of my front axles.
Oh, well, that'll do it.
Because they were so incredibly rusted and torqued to that they were holding on by a dream, which I'm so happy it happened there and not at highway speeds or in the middle of the Cleveland Lloyd Dinosaur Quarry. Where when I picked the car up, I was just like, oh, here for the 2004 Acura. And they were like, oh, the head mechanic wants to talk to you. He came out holding the axles with a very befuddled look on his face. He was like, what do you do with this thing? I was like, I just drive it to and from work. And he's like, I'm not going to call the cops on you. What do you do with this thing? And I was like, I don't believe you. He's like, I've never seen axles
to and from
this
work
bad.
too hard.
I bought a used car that came from Michigan, and I've never had a rustier car. Michigan is just you go
it's
there
bad on cars.
to destroy cars and to make them.
Yes, and to make them. It's the alpha and the omega of cars. Anyways, so Pachycephalosaurus. In this paper, Peterson et al. Does a really interesting and very thorough survey of Pachycephalosaurus skull domes and analyzes them for any sort of pathological lesion. And turns out, because we've said before on, I believe it was like in Stegosaurus and in like Triceratops and Torosaurus and some of the other ceratopsians, that like if these animals were using these structures for combative purpose, we would expect to find injuries on them. And boy howdy, are there injuries on Pachycephalosaur domes. So basically, they start off by grouping the dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus into two groups. There are let me get up to the section where this actually is described. There it is. So basically, the paper groups the dome-headed Pachycephalosaurus into a fully domed and a partially domed group. Now, the fully domed one, I guess it would be more easy to describe starting with the partially domed ones. So the partially domed ones are ones that are defined by having a parietal that is developed and very well integrated with the frontal, but not fully basically fused into one bone. And the fully domed ones are the ones where that bone is just a frontoparietal. And so the fully domed ones would be like Pachycephalosaurus itself and the other Hell Creek Pachycephalosaur that no one ever talks about it, Spherotholus. And then the partial... What?
Fun fact, Dr. Carr was on the paper that named that. I think that was the first thing he named.
Yeah, interestingly.
Yeah.
Cool.
It was, yeah.
And then the partially domed ones are things like Stegosaurus, Koiocephaly, which that one has the fun name that means knucklehead. And it's a good one. It's a really good name.
That's so good.
I might be pronouncing it wrong.
Wait, which one?
Koiocephaly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Gravitholus, things like that. So they found some interesting results in this. Namely, that they analyzed 109 skulls and found that 22% of them had some sort of lesion on the head. And now the first thing was they wanted to make sure, like, are these definitely lesions from some sort of trauma? And basically they came up with a list of other hypotheses that could possibly lead to things that looked like this, and a series of 5 characters that an explanation would need to fit to show what are being seen on these skulls. Namely, that they are pit-like depressions, they're present in thick bones, they have evidence of healing, they're specific to pachycephalosaurs, they're specific to frontoparietals, and they're specific to adults. And the specific to adults thing is because this paper is written under the assumption that the domeless pachycephalosaurs are either subadults or females.
I'm sorry. Please continue. There is a flaw with this paper, though.
What is the flaw?
Well, it's something we touched on in Hemalocephalae. They were assuming that flat-headed pachycephalosaurs are females or juveniles.
Yes.
And we talked about in the Hemalocephalae video, there doesn't really seem to be evidence that flat-headed pachycephalosaurs are maturing into fully dome-headed ones.
Yes.
By which I don't even mean things like dracorex, which like kind of doesn't really have a dome at all, but like Hemalocephalae clearly has a flat skull table that is otherwise like kind of ornamented more like a dome-headed pachycephalosaur, but without a dome. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to note that the paper was operating under that assumption because it was written before the evidence from the Prenocephalae growth series was analyzed.
Yes, but right. I think that even excluding that one that one characteristic of these injuries, they come up with a list of other possible causes to these, including like insect borings, feeding traces from theropods or crocodilians, fluvial erosion and abrasion, non-traumatic bone resorption, infectious diseases, as well as trauma-induced osteomyelitis. And even if we cut out the specific to adults one because of the assumptions, bless you, that this paper was written under, the only thing that fits all of these criteria is still the trauma-induced osteomyelitis. So osteomyelitis, for those of you who are fortunate enough to not know what that is, it's bone infection. So this can be caused in a couple ways. Mostly, it either boils down to an incredibly bad blood infection that then moves into the bone, or trauma to the bone. So the fact that all of these injuries are isolated to the top of the skull is interesting. And they actually have they have a cool graphic on here. It's figure 5 that shows all of the locations of these injuries on the skull. And boy, howdy, they are all right on the top of the dome. And another thing that I think is more interesting is they have them kind of grouped in the fully domed and partially domed set on there, with the partially domed ones being in white and the fully domed ones being in black. And the fully domed ones are even more concentrated right on the center of the top of the head. And the partially domed ones are a bit broader all over the dome. But the fact that 22% of these specimens have injuries is absolutely incredible. With a lot of individual specimens, like if they had one injury, they had several. There's two particularly like let's say boisterous individuals that were on here. There was a Gravitholus that was shown with 4 injuries to the frontal and 20 to the parietal, and a Pachycephalosaurus with 23 to the frontal and 8 to the parietal. These were some belligerent, boneheaded dudes.
This reminds me, not to interrupt, but like of the study it's somewhat recent, the study that was done on like bighorn sheep, because people are like, wow, how are they avoiding brain injury? The answer is they're not.
Yes. That was one of my favorite papers to bring up on this channel.
It's so good because it's like, I mean, it's something I see in paleo a lot, at least like in discussions of the pachycephalosaurs, like, oh, there's no way, they're not built to take that stress. They'd be injuring each other. And we look at modern animals, they're like, yeah, they sure do.
Yeah.
And fun fact, this paper also looks at extant bovids and looks at their skulls. And golly gee, would you know, the ones that headbutt also get trauma-induced osteomyelitis on the head that looks, would you believe it, really similar to what we see in pachycephalosaurs. And
now, I'm sorry, Scott. Please finish. I've got another paper to bring up after this.
Okay, so I think what is also just a really fun little bow to tie on this whole thing is that we, as I said earlier in this little soapbox here, like it has been pretty commonly accepted that the horns on ceratopsians and like the thagomizer on Stegosaurus were respectively used for, well, both intraspecific combat and defense in these cases. Probably less so with the spikes on Stegosaurus. That would be pretty gnarly. But definitely the horns on like things like Triceratops. And when it comes to comparing the numbers here, let me find the exact. Yes. We do also find injuries on the thagomizer of Stegosaurus and on the horns and frill of Triceratops. We find, but on Stegosaurus, only 9.8 of the specimens of Stegosaur thagomisers show evidence of injuries, and 14% in Triceratops. So to have a group of animals that are way less well known, at least definitely than Triceratops, to have a percentage that's so much higher is fascinating, and shows that like these guys weren't just headbutting or using their heads in some sort of antagonistic manner. Probably headbutting, definitely headbutting. They were doing it all the time, like so common. And the other interesting thing that was brought up in this paper is none of the domeless Pachycephalosaurus showed any evidence of similar lesions. But yeah, the only other thing that I would love to chat about in here is that this paper did bring up some incredible comparisons with some other very belligerent dinosaurs, namely a group of ducks that I was talking about with Dom from Wildlife Wire yesterday. The steamer ducks that are some of my new favorite group of birds, because these are a group, it's a genus that contains 4 species of mostly flightless ducks that are from the southernmost part of South America that have evolved flightlessness purely because they got too huge and too brawly to fly. And they just beat the ever-living shit out of each other, and very frequently other species. There's even a paper that at least hypothesizes that because it's really common for these guys to also beat the crap out of other ducks in their ecosystem, and do so as a display to females as well, to show off, like, this is how big and strong I am. Watch me go jump this guy. And one of the hypotheses that they propose, and that is at least talked about in this paper, is that steamer ducks have become so massive and muscular that this has made the costs or risks of interspecific aggression negligible. Basically, they're too heavily built and too huge to actually be hurt by other ducks that would be competitors for their resources. So they're just like, the most economical thing I can do is beat you to death so I can keep my food. They go on later in the paper and kind of push against that, but they're
like the Triceratops and Saurian.
Exactly.
Right. They're like, I'm sorry, the best ecological decision I can make is to kill everything else.
Yeah. What it really seems like, according to the rest of the paper, is, and these guys also, they have keratinous knobs on their wings that are used as cudgels to, again, beat things to death with. Is what it really seems is they're incredibly territorial around their nesting area, and they'll just beat the crap out of anything that goes into that area.
Man, sorry, I looked it up, and you can see the knobs.
Yeah, they're gross.
Wow, that's bad. Looks like an infection.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really sad about is that, like, there's almost no video of these guys actually doing Bird Fight Club. And I'm really sad about that because, all of the descriptions...
Scott, there's no pictures of bird-on-bird violence. What kind of sentence is that?
I want to see them in action. I don't want to watch animals just beating the shit out of each other like that.
That's what you just said.
That is what you just said. I'm going to intervene here.
Okay.
So 2 years before this paper, there was another paper that should have settled this debate, which was focusing on the actual anatomy of the dome. Because I think it is worthwhile to say, like, if a structure is being used as a weapon, you would expect to find it injured. And the fact that there are injuries on the structure and not elsewhere is indicative of its use as a weapon. Another thing relates to the actual comparative anatomy of these structures, right? Like, do the domes have any sort of adaptation that you would normally find in headbutting animals today? And the answer is yes. This was a paper written by Eric Snively and Jessica Theodore. Jessica Theodore is not a dinosaur researcher mostly. She mostly studies ungulates. Eric Snively does a lot of dinosaur functional morphology, so this was a good pairing. And in a very short summary, their paper, which is open access, you can read it, finds that CT scans of Stegosaurus shows that there is a presence of osteological correlates of headbutting behavior on these animals as well. So what you see are a tendency toward acquiring a dome-like head morphology, a presence of a lot of neurovascular canals exiting onto the cranium surface. This would be important because, like, you may think, oh, you don't want sensation there, but A, you do, you want to know what's happening, and B, you need blood supply to heal. So, if you're getting these infections, right, it's evidence that there's actually a lot of, like, if you're getting blood infections near the bone that are causing osteomyelitis, you need blood supply. So you have that. Large neck muscle attachments and dense cortical bone above a sparse layer of cancellous bone in line with the line of impact. So what this means is that you get very, very dense bone over spongy bone. And spongy bone has, you have both of these bone types in most of the bones in your body. Some bones are going to have more of one, some are more of the other. We actually now know that the architectural lines of the layers of spongy bone, which we call the trabeculae, another term for this is trabecular bone, are very correlated with direction of loading. So, like, those trabeculae in your limb bones primarily go top to bottom because your limb bones are mostly loaded that way. By having a dense layer of bone over the spongy bone, you're essentially able to absorb shocks better. And so all of these osteological correlates are found to be present in Stegosaurus through CT scanning of the skull. They also mentioned something that I was not aware of previously, which is that there is a living dome-headed headbutting animal, which is a species of diker. It's not quite as much of a dome as a pachycephalosaur, but it has a large midline dome that is developed that it does use for headbutting. It's specifically the diker's Cephalophus, leucogaster, which I forget the common name. But this species, it's not very well known, but it is known to do this kind of headbutting behavior, and it has an anatomy that's much more similar to a pachycephalosaur than, like, a muskox or a bighorn sheep. And so I think not only is, like, the structural arrangement of the dome very indicative of headbutting behavior, but the argument that modern animals don't headbutt with domed surfaces is not correct. It's not based on a complete survey of the diversity of living ungulates today.
Cool.
It's certainly not the most common solution, but it is one that exists.
I also just wanted to mention a thought that occurred to me related to kind of the evidence of injury in pachycephalosaurs relative to, like, stegosaur thagomisers and ceratopsian horns could also potentially relate to what exactly is covering them, right? Like, if injuries are happening in ceratopsian horns and in stegosaur thagomisers, you've got a bony core and then presumably a keratinous sheath that more or less mimics the shape of the underlying bone. And if something is going to break, it's probably going to be distal to, like, the distalmost end is what's going to be injured more often than not. And if that's just the keratin, then that's not going to preserve in the fossil record to the extent that if this thing is just kind of under some hard skin and scales.
That's a good point.
More likely to get evidence to the bone itself that something has happened.
One other thing that I think is worth mentioning is, like, we talked about this a little bit in the Stygimoloch video. These things have a foramen magnum that is on the ventral side of their head.
They talk about it in the Lost World.
The spinal cord is exiting the bottom of the skull. So when there's, they are adapting in a way that the spine is interfacing with the skull differently. And I think that is good evidence.
It's another thing that they mentioned in the Lost World, which is very funny. That is.
I couldn't believe that was real.
Yeah.
It's 100% paleontologically accurate. It's like, oh, cool.
Yeah. I can't believe this was ever really a debate. A little bit. Like, there is just so much evidence that this is being used as a weapon. It's like, it's 12 inches of bone. Animals don't develop this for no reason. I don't necessarily think a muskox, like, kind of line up and charge is necessarily even that likely. I think Prehistoric Planet does a much better, or a much more plausible job of illustrating what a fight between these animals may have looked like, where it's kind of repeated, pushing matches and impacts with each other, both on the side and on the head. It's much more of an ugly kind of brawl than a very structured fight, which I think is plausible. I also don't know if these animals were intelligent enough to even do a very kind of structured ritualized combat. They may have just been wailing on each other.
Well, you don't need intelligence to do ritualized behavior.
I mean,
I don't think.
I would say that you probably... I mean, it depends on what you mean by ritualized, but I mean things with, very precise choreography that's done like that. To my knowledge, you only really see that in mammals and birds.
My hunch that I cannot, support with evidence right now is that I'm sure there are invertebrates that do this. That do very particular behaviors, or, lining up and squaring each other up and things. I don't know. It seems like a really broad assumption to make. I think the basic steps of we square up and we turn left and then we charge is that's not. I would call that ritualized. I would not call it intelligent. That's a pretty simple pathway.
That's fair. Although to be honest, I don't know if we can really do insects seem to be capable of a lot more cognitively than we understand they should be able to be. So I mean, maybe I'll restrict it within vertebrates with at least that common set of intellectual machinery. You don't see that.
Lizards are stupid. They do their little behaviors and their little rituals when they fight.
But right, I don't mean nothing, but I mean very, very choreographed display behavior where there's a full sequence of the steps that you do and you line up and you go and charge. I'm happy to be wrong on this, but it's
sharks do it too. Sharks do weird hunching and behaviors and interactions with each other. I think I just my point here is not that these things were smart. It's just that I don't think it takes the brain power I don't think it takes a lot of brain power to achieve a choreographed behavior.
That's fair. I mean, totally possible.
Because it's just stimulus response, as we do when we begin these videos. Right. It's just, you get the cue and you do the response. I don't think it requires a tremendous amount of intelligence, intelligence in the sense of on the mammal standard of things. I
mean, I think it just depends on what level of organization you're putting on this stuff. Animals certainly they do choreographed behaviors, but I mean there are certainly much more complex social or interspecific display things that again you will see in birds and mammals that you don't really see as much in reptiles.
Yeah, no, I'm not denying that. I'm just saying I think the baseline for what I would call a ritual is lower.
That's fair. No, but I mean I think specifically a very, very kind of precise combat cycle where it's it's almost they're kind of lining up by turns and going to fight each other. I don't know. It seems a little... my gut instinct is that these animals weren't getting there, but regardless of whether they could do it neurologically, I don't think they could do it physically. I do agree that you don't want to charge bowling balls into each other at 30 miles an hour and have them impact. Mm-hmm. I think it's much more likely that these were kind of much more close range fights where they were hitting each other on the head. And maybe weren't even aiming for the head, but they were almost using the head as kind of kind of like in sword fighting, where the sword is simultaneously the weapon and the defense. Right, where it's they're kind of they're using their head to block the other one's head, and that's why they're hitting.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and listen, just to be clear, this is completely navel gazing. We have no way of knowing.
No.
This is literally impossible. But that would be my hunch. Yeah,
because this is something that we see in goats and stuff too. Sure, they will do the whole classic head-on-head thing, but a lot of the time it seems like the blows that really win fights are the ones to the flanks and the unprotected areas and stuff, because those hurt a whole lot more because that's not designed to take that injury.
I would also, I mean, we don't have a lot of Pachycephalosaur postcrania at all.
Yeah.
There was only one associated skull and postcranium of Pachycephalosaurus. It's a private specimen. The species identity isn't known. This is Sandy, right?
Yeah.
If you've seen it in a museum, you've probably seen that animal. As far as I know, it hasn't been reposited in any institution yet, which means it can't really be formally studied. Mm-hmm. So, even though that exists, we don't really know a lot.
And
I would not be surprised if when we find this stuff that... I would not be surprised if we find a full Pachycephalosaurus wyomingensis like a big individual, find a full skeleton, would not be surprised if we find a bunch of broken ribs.
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. That is something that they also bring up in the Peterson paper, is that, like, they show the injuries of extant bovids and stuff throughout the whole body and not just on the head. And, like, oh, good Lord. Yeah, they were beating the crap out of each other all over the place.
Yeah. No, you get quite there's quite a lot. I mean, tyrannosaurs have injuries all over the place too. Like, most individuals I'm aware of have broken ribs. I would not be surprised if that's something that's happening because of intraspecific combat.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say most, but many individuals I'm aware of have at least one broken rib.
I'll also put a little bit extra point on your thing earlier about the types of bone and stuff. In this paper, they also do point out that the frontal parietal domes have quite a bit of fibrolaminar bone in there, which they do specifically point out that it has the ability to rapidly remodel and heal, which seems like a pretty good thing that you would want.
Yeah. Well, right, but not only that, like, it is advantageous for taking the impact, and I do like seeing this through a structural kind of, like, is it built to do this? And it seems to be, with comparison to budding animals. Yes, it is. And also, obviously, like, it's so obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. I would almost be, and this is actually something that, like, I've tried to do a little bit of looking into this while we were chatting about it, but I haven't been able to find anything definitive. This is something I genuinely just want to ask to Wildlife Wire, because James, you brought up that, like, you wouldn't be surprised if they're used defensively against, like, predators of a similar body size. I'm not sure if bighorn sheep do that. I'm not sure if they even do. Like,
I don't know.
There's a lot of bovid horns and stuff that you would look at that and go, they probably would use that against predators, and, like, impala never do and stuff.
No. Well, I mean, then again, you have things like pigs that have big tusks that they do use when they're fighting each other that are used defensively. Like, with a lot of this, I would rank this among the things that, as paleontologists, we can't know. But I think it's certainly plausible to imagine it either way. Especially, like, it's also possible, from my general inclination, is that bovids of above a certain size start to use their horns defensively when they really can. And so it's possible that, like, something like Spherotholus or Stegosaurus that's quite small-bodied would not be using its dome to defend against predators because it's probably better for it to run. But when you start to be the size of, like literally the size of a bison, like, maybe when a juvenile T-Rex comes at you, Pachycephalosaurus says, "Oh yeah? Okay." And starts running towards you.
And the last critter that I wanted to bring up for headbutting things and having just the exact same Pachycephalosaur shape is that relatively new giraffe relative from the other year. Discocarex.
Yeah.
The short-necked giraffe with the Pachycephalosaur dome.
Right. So obviously, and this was also cited as a headbutting adaptation.
Yes. It's hard to find art of it not headbutting.
Right, because it's obviously a headbutting adaptation. Look, the neck is going directly into the underside of the skull.
But have we considered, what if, hear me out, what if dinosaurs were just weird?
Well, no, because we haven't brought up the two very important things that I know that we need to, which is, one, this is the ancestral state to how bald men should solve their conflicts.
This is true.
And two, that all of this was smoke and mirrors, and it really is like that one meme of that these are eggs, this is their incubation, and when they are threatened, they fire the babies out of them like cannons. I love that meme so much. I love it so much. It's
really
stupid.
Funny. It's just, okay, Discocarex, it looks like the spine is entering, like, again, the bottom of the skull. They actually describe it as forming, like, a basioccipital platform to articulate with the spine.
Wow.
These are head-butting animals. They're butting heads. Everybody's saying it. That's just what they're doing. And
Well,
no, I'm not done, Scott.
okay.
Sorry.
I thought you were leaving it there.
No. I must once again say that I really don't love the impulse in our field to kind of like de-cool the dinosaurs a little bit. I don't know. I saw a tweet thread yesterday about like, images of scientists and researchers, and like I see a lot of arguments on both sides because there's obviously like a lot of harmful stereotypes about like what a scientist looks like. They're usually men. Often in paleontology they have beards. That's bad.
And are white.
That's also bad. The stereotype of what a scientist looks like should not be that exclusionary. However,
ask an AI model to like a scientist. You'll see people that
if you
look
ask
like
it
me.
to draw a paleontologist, it will just give you a picture of Scott.
It'll just give you me. Oh no!
Yeah.
Wait, let me.
Don't do it. Don't give the AI model any insight. But I don't think it's bad for there to be like a stereotype of no matter who's a scientist that they like kind of look cool and that science has cool stuff going on. Because the sad reality is that most fields of life, of like not just science, but anything you do, most of it's annoying bookkeeping. Like most of being a doctor is dealing with insurance companies. Most of being a lawyer is doing paperwork and like doing discovery work. You're not in court like epically owning people on the stand. Like that's just not how the real world works. Most of paleontology is not the coolest parts of it. But I personally think it's okay for people to imagine the cool parts because that makes them interested in the science. And then if you're interested, you accept the parts that are mostly working with spreadsheets and programming. Like that's a lot of my life is a lot of typing zeros and ones into a spreadsheet.
And then people getting disappointed when they ask you if you've been in the field and you're like, no.
Not recently, right.
Not really.
Yeah. I don't think it's a bad thing for things to be cool. And I do think that there was kind of a push culturally with the paleo, I want to say, like in the wake of Jurassic Park, that I think was maybe a little bit culturally like kind of a reaction to sudden interest in dinosaurs, where it felt like there was kind of an obsession with everything trying to be, could they really do that? And then try and argue that they couldn't. Because it was with everything. It was like, T-Rex was a scavenger. Pachycephalosaurus wasn't a headbutter and didn't do that. It was just some sort of display structure. Triceratops wasn't using its horns and frill in combat or for defense. Sauropods aren't using their tails for anything. Like it's, you know what I mean?
I'd also lump the T-Rex wasn't fast into there as well.
T-Rex wasn't, but I mean, in that case,
run. Mm-hmm.
Right? But T-Rex also definitely couldn't run. But I mean,
and the T-Rex couldn't roar thing.
Well, right. I mean, there's a lot of this kind of stuff, and I think it is generally. I think that we should be asking those questions more when there seems to be a very compelling scientific reason to be investigating them, because I think in the absence of that, it doesn't tell us that much about evolution, and it does kind of run the risk of feeling like a killjoy scientifically. If you're giving a public talk and all of your research is kind of like, well, dinosaurs weren't actually that cool. I don't know.
If you in your research find yourself constantly asking questions that are ultimately well actuallys, maybe you should consider something interesting. Like that's kind of my takeaway from this. Like your research should not be guided by correcting media that is meant to just be fun and cool. Like
right. And there are good reasons to ask a lot of these questions depending on what you're interested in. Like
right, but the reason is not was Jurassic Park right?
Right.
The reason is,
big
picture evolution, like actually important things that matter in terms of our understanding of life on Earth.
And I would also exhort any scientists, like, I'm of two minds on this as well, because I think that it is kind of ludicrous the number of different roles academics are asked to fill. I think that you need to be a little bit careful with how you present the results of your work to the field, to like a broader public, because you do have a lot of power to frame anything. Like, there's always a way that you can articulate something to be more interesting and more inspiring and encouraging, even if your answer is a negative. And I think that for public communication of science, that's important, right? That's like I gave a popular talk recently. It's up on YouTube about my work at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and I was careful to say that regardless of what answer we ultimately come to in the research, here's the importance of it. Versus like just deciding, is this animal real or not?
It was a good talk.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that that's an important way to approach these things, right? If we determine that T-Rex couldn't run, why is that important? What does that tell us? Like, I don't think that it's great science communication or public outreach to make your takeaway like, haha, the movie was wrong. It was actually less cool than that.
Well, and that's, to side note very briefly, like, that's part of why at least I've had fun doing this channel, because like that from the get-go, we decided that that's not what we were going to do. You know, because it's not something like at this point, everybody's already heard most of these arguments 1,000 times over. And, you know, again, as obviously, as we've articulated now the past couple of minutes, that's to us, at least as working professionals in the field, not the interesting part about the science at all. Like, it's cool and fun, but, you know, ultimately what interests us and the reason that we're working in this field at all is the bigger picture context of all of this in terms of evolution and biology and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like why we ask the kinds of questions we even ask in paleontology. Like, you know, why do we want to know these things to begin with? I think of the thousands of people that we've had watch this channel, I like to think that like maybe one or two are people who did not fully understand what science was, and maybe will have their opinion change as a result of seeing how science is really done, how scientists really approach things, and like what it really is on the inside. And if there's one person who has changed their opinion of science and scientists because of watching us, I will feel like our mission has been fulfilled. I would love it to be more than one, but I do hope that eventually we can enact some positive change in that regard. Sorry, Dalton, you've wanted to say something.
I have, and it's fine because I think we've kind of finished this aspect of this discussion, but I wanted to turn back to kind of the beginning of what we like, what kicked this off. And James, what you were saying dovetails nicely because I think this part can reach more of our direct audience. Because I think what's interesting, especially with paleontology, is James spoke correctly about how academics have too many hats and are expected to do a ton of different things. And you know, rightfully, maybe unrightfully so, everyone has a lot to do. So, like, far be it from academics to complain about being like, oh, I have so much to do. It's like, yeah, so does everyone. But, like, it's contingent on us doing research to, like, communicate that research and try to explain to people, like, why it's important, why it's interesting. There is, in paleontology, an interesting kind of intermediary of, like, not even necessarily, like, professional science communicators, but, like, enthusiasts who do a lot of communication. And I think they do a lot of good for the field. It's people who like, and this is especially prevalent in social media, but people share a lot of things and talk about it and are really passionate about it. And I think it's awesome. But I think it's extremely important, especially if you're in a position like that, and if that's like something you're passionate about, is to try to frame science communication in a more positive way and try to use less gotcha moments. Like, I feel like this was especially in vogue in like the early to mid 2000s of like, oh, this is wrong. Turns out this is wrong. The thing you knew, it's wrong. It's like, that doesn't really make people feel good. Like, maybe someone will be interested to know, oh, why was I wrong? But probably more people are going to be like, oh, well, cool, I guess I was wrong. That's fun. Like, there's kind of a meme of your average Joe being like, oh, scientists are just out trying to make dinosaurs lame. Like, everything I knew was wrong and everything's lame and boring. And people are like, oh, why do they think that? Like, paleontology is so interesting and cool, and we've made all these interesting new discoveries. Like, in part, it's because it was communicated to people like, ha, you're wrong. Everything you knew was wrong, and everything is lame and boring. And it's like, hey, maybe that's a poor strategy. Like, maybe we're reaping what we sowed in the late 90s and early 2000s. And like, you can explain to people that like, oh, the things that you saw like in XY movie probably don't reflect what we think currently, without framing it of what did it get wrong? What did this do wrong? Like, I implore people to take a more positive and kind approach to the way that they communicate the science that happens in our field, because people are interested and they do want to learn. And there is a baseline awareness among people that like, oh, you know, like, hey, this is a thing I saw in Jurassic Park. That's very cool. And because people learn about dinosaurs, at least in the US, in like first grade and then never again, that's like whatever they learned however many years ago first grade was, plus whatever they saw in Jurassic Park, like that may be their perception of dinosaurs. And it may be flawed in certain ways. And it's not, but I also, and like, that's just what people know, right? But I also think that reasonable people approach things from the thing like, okay, I saw this in Jurassic Park. Maybe it's true. but it is a movie, maybe it's not. And like, if you can explain to them like, hey, like, here's why, like, at a time people thought this, and now like the evidence has changed and this, that, like, if you can engage with like a dialogue without just immediately off-putting someone with like, wrong, lame, like, oh, you thought that was cool? That was dumb of you to think that that was cool. Didn't you know that it actually like could only bend left and right, not up and down, or I don't know. Like, just the kind of gotcha, you're wrong science communication, I don't think is an effective strategy at all. And you see it less and less, and that's good. But I think like it's just important to keep that in mind.
I think that was also more popular because I think for a while science communication was a little bit more in group. Like I think if you're dealing with people who are kind of already very interested, that sort of stuff somehow does a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I think if you're trying to engage more broadly, it doesn't work. But I also think like the one thing that I would implore a lot of people who are like kind of professionally science communicators to do is try to talk to scientists directly to get a little bit of inside information, because like you just see all the time. There's some kind of game of telephone that's played and something is wrong. And it would be like, I don't know. I think it's good to try to get that info from scientists a little bit. But I think that like it's great, and to a degree like we engage different sections of an audience, and it's important to have all sorts of like steps in the pipeline, if you will, not to imply some sort of nefarious plan here, but like there are going to be people who are better.
Pipeline.
The paleo pipeline, man, everybody's fallen in. You might be able, like, somebody may know nothing about science, and like a very charismatic public science person it can excite them by just saying like, hey, isn't this really cool? Like it's media that's in some sort of format that's accessible and digestible to that person. I don't think that we at the Skeleton Crew are getting a lot of people who don't already like dinosaurs to some degree. But I hope that what we're doing is like a good job of taking, so people who already like dinosaurs and may want to get into the field professionally now have a much more direct source to scientists and like a good window into what the field is really like. I think in the future, it's something I certainly would like to do for the channel a little bit, is to try to make some new kinds of content that might be better at like, essentially engaging people who don't already share a passion for this stuff. But that may also never be our role. I just also sometimes, I'm sometimes pained to see some like kind of like miscommunications of science fact being disseminated publicly. And like, that's just the thing. There's always going to be some mistake made though. Like nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we've done a good job turning Pachycephalosaurus into a nail for this particular hammer. Should we rank it?
I think we should.
Well, it's very hammer shaped.
It is.
This hammer. That's a good point.
Yeah.
It's the hammer for our nail.
There's no point. It's hammer shaped.
It's a dome.
It's a dome.
Dome Depot.
It's the dome for our dome.
What's it? It's the specific kind of hammer that's like
Ball
rounded.
peen?
Is there
It's
a
a
name
ball
for that?
peen.
Ball peen.
Yeah.
Why is it called that?
Well, you got your ball, you got your peen.
Because that part of the hammer is called the peen. It is what it's
You
called.
put a ball on your peen.
I know. Hey,
Great.
put a ball on my peen.
Stop.
Stop it.
I wanted to circle back in briefly of just, my phone turned off. Never mind. Sorry. I didn't know we were already in the species viewer because my phone hates me. I just wanted to just echo, everything that James said of just like that, the form of science communication of like, guess what? Actually, everything you know is wrong. I think is just not, it's not productive. It's not, I see it in even people who haven't like had a conversation with me yet. When they find out I'm a paleontologist, almost, I would say like 70% of the time, the then reaction is, oh, so you must hate Jurassic Park. And there's kind of like a dejectedness about them. Like they're disappointed in it almost. I'm like, no, what do you mean? But that's because that's been what's happened in mainstream scicomm for the past, 30 years. So.
Right. And I think people are often alarmed when I'm like, actually, it's one of my favorite movies. I really like it. Like, and if you know what, if you don't like it, you can kind of just don't. It's okay if you don't mention it. Like, and I'm also different depending on my audience. Like when I'm talking to an audience of young kids, if they ask me about Jurassic World Dominion, it's not a movie I particularly like. But like, I'm not going to sit down with a group of elementary schoolers and be like, "Ha! That's wrong. Pyroraptor looks like
no, I'll sit down with them and say that because the story structure's bad.
Right. I'm like, it's incompetently written.
Well,
this would have gotten a B in film school.
I would say it depends on the audience too, because some of like kids especially, they like to. Well, what happens with kids usually is they're like, "Wow, I heard this was wrong," right? Because then you can build on it. Like, and that's kind of how how I approach scicomm and also like dealing with these movies in general is I just build on it. I don't tear it down, and that's why like I've said this 1,000 times before, but it's like almost all of my outreach talks. The first slide after the intro is the Jurassic World mosasaur because that's what people know. That's how. I had a dentist appointment last week, and to explain what I worked, I'm like, "Oh, you've seen the Jurassic World, you know, the one that bites the shark?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, yeah, "It's that. Like, that's it. That's the point of entry. It doesn't matter how accurate it is because that's usually like that's not the interesting thing, you know, in my opinion, about what I do or about those animals." So,
and we've made this point before, but like having more dinosaur media is just helpful for us. So, please, as a field, let's not try to immediately assassinate every new piece of media and hold it up to a standard. And like make all of your informative threads about how accurate the animals in it are, because it's not for you. It's for somebody who doesn't know this stuff already. And don't make them feel stupid for liking it.
Mm-hmm.
And that attitude of trying to correct everybody and immediately jumping down the throats of any new media is exactly the reason why people think scientists are killjoy losers. Like, it is not helpful to this field, and it is not helpful in terms of convincing people like that politician we talked about earlier that we do actually need money to do science that matters and that our science does actually matter. Because there's just this, it's perpetuating the narrative, so to speak, that we are killjoy losers. So,
right now, to be a killjoy loser, we should assign a numerical rating to this animal.
I'm sorry, I have strong feelings that I'm holding back. But not about this animal. Here's the thing. I said this already. Yeah. I was surprised by how much I actually liked this. Like once, like I said, we were kind of screwing around before we started actually recording. By screwing around, I want to be clear. Business meeting had to happen. But we
don't screw around.
No, never. We do not waste company time here at Skeleton Crew Paleontology LLC. Anyway. So in that time, there was a couple of these guys walking around in front of, you know, the hatchery thing, and they looked so much better than I remembered. I don't know what I'm remembering. I don't know what image of a pachycephalosaur I had in my head. As I also said earlier, I do not agree with this animal as a concept. I think it's very ugly. I don't like it. However. The model in the game, especially from a distance, I did not like when we zoomed in on the face at all. But from from a medium distance, not a far distance, from a medium distance, which is the distance at which I tend to play the game, it looks phenomenal, and I like it a lot. And I really like the colors. I like all the patterns that give them little, like, dark little socks. I think that's great. That's spoiler. No, not spoiler. I don't know what the word is that I'm trying to achieve. One of my favorite like creature design aesthetics is when they have little socks. So I have to give it an S. I hate myself for it because I don't like this as an animal, but the design and the colors and the little socks, and from this is a good distance. Like, this is what I would envision the animal would look like, more or less. It's a good Jurassic Park version of the animal. I don't, care about the accuracy details. Yeah, no, it's great.
I have a tremendous fondness for this design. I love the detailing of it. I think that in general, the Jurassic Park designs were actually quite good. Artistically and as naturalistic animals. There are inaccuracies. Some of the designs are better than others. I know we don't really care about that in our rankings here, but this is just to be clear. This is not me saying that they're flawless, but that as creature designs for movies, they manage to strike a resemblance to the real animal while also having deviations that feel biological instead of just kind of dumb. This is why I'm not a huge fan of some of the redesigns done for things like the Jurassic World franchise in general, because to me they stop feeling biologically informed or based. It stops feeling like I'm looking at a real animal, even if that real animal
they're not biologically based anymore. They're biologically cringe.
They are.
Yes,
they are
biologically cringe. What? Like what?
Well, I mean, like, I don't know, the Indoraptor in general, like, it doesn't look like a real animal that could exist. And I know it's a mutant, but I still feel like it should feel like a real biological entity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. The creature from The Thing also doesn't feel like a real animal, but it certainly feels like a living thing that's alive, even when it's a mass of flesh that's dissolving dogs into soap. I like things that feel like they are animals, even if they don't necessarily match the anatomy of the real animal. And I like this as an animal. It feels lively, it feels real. It's got beautiful color patterns, and I like the kind of subtleness of the blue against the brown. Like, that's not a color pattern you see a lot. I like that they went to that effort in Jurassic Park to give every animal a naturalistic feeling color pattern that also, like, I don't know, just kind of like fit the vibe of the creature. Like, give them little display features and flares and all of that because an animal would have them. Not because it's necessarily doing anything for the story, but just because, like, an animal would look like that. Right? You'd have these subtle patterns and coloration just because that's what animals are like. I don't know if I would rank this as an S tier design just because it is a little, like, I'm very fond of it and I like it a lot, but it does strike me as just a little bit boring for S tier, but maybe that's just because it's an ornithischian and I don't have that kind of intrinsic passion for them. So I'm going to give this an A, but a high A. I really do like it.
I'll come right off the bat and say this one is also an A for me. Like, for animals in S tier, at least how we've been kind of ranking them, are, at least for me, critters that are like, they're so good that they're almost like an emblematic representation of this animal, or a design that goes so incredibly hard that, like, it's become like one of the go-to things that I think of when I think of, like, any depiction of that animal. And, like, I like this a lot. I think it's a really good Pachycephalosaurus. I really like that that it has social behaviors where it'll just casually go by and, like, headbutt and stuff, because that was one of the things that was really missing in the previous game, was that with the socialization system that they had in the previous game, where they basically just sat there in knitting circles and chatted with each other.
They would hang out.
They'd just hang out. They'd just, like, open up a couple beers with the dudes.
They cracked open a cold one with the boys, you mean?
Instead of cracking open a cold skull with their other boys. Is that it, like, basically you only ever saw these animals doing the thing that we know that they did when they were upset, because they would fight with each other when their, like, needs weren't good enough. But now they'll, like, headbutt and all that stuff, and they'll do that to, like, establish dominance and stuff as well, which I also really like, because that's the way that they just combat with each other, to figure out which one of them is the alpha or whatever it is, even though that's wrong. But I think it's fantastic. I've always kind of liked Pachycephalosaurus. It's a very fun, blunt instrument of an animal, and learning about it just made me like it even more. So yes, solid A tier for me.
I will briefly communicate from my absent roommate, who sent a list of 6 points, 3 of which I cannot read, but I will read the 3 that I can. He says that the retro design is charming, easy A, also they big. And they are big. That is something we didn't say too much, but, like, the sandy specimen, when you see it, gives a good sense of, like, what this animal would have looked like. But it is this, if you compare the skull to the AMNH skull, it is a smaller individual of Pachycephalosaurus. Like, the AMNH skull implies a pretty big, not like the humungosaur version that we talked about that Scott was trying to find the origin of, but they are, like.
Oh, I don't think we mentioned that in the recording.
Well, Scott was trying to find the origin of, like, the one image where, like, it's, like, as big as a T-Rex. Like, absolutely not. But they are big compared to other Pachycephalosaurs. So Alex gives it an A. I really enjoy the design. I also find it charming. I love it in the movie. I think what I kind of always remember is there's an image of, there's some Pachycephalosaur puppets that were not actually used in the movie. I think they were in a cutscene. Because the one in the movie, I believe, is always a
as in a scene that was cut. I was thinking.
Oh no, yeah, in a scene that was cut. I believe in the actual final cut of The Lost World, it's only a CG animal.
No, it's not.
That's not
no,
true.
it's not.
When the arm's coming down around it and inflating,
okay.
it's definitely animatronic.
Right, well, then that's where that puppet came from. It is used in that scene. I forgot about the big inflatable arms, which is like I can't believe I forgot about that. That's one of my favorite parts of the movie. I like a bizarre vehicle apparatus, which The Lost World is tremendously good at providing. It's like
I like the seat that extends out.
Dude, they got the seat that extends out. They've got the arms that inflate. They've got it's like the Mad Max of Jurassic World or Jurassic Park. Excuse me.
I really must maintain the dinosaurs in The Lost World are probably the best iteration of them as creatures ever. I'm watching the scene right now and I'm just like, it's so stunning.
Good.
It's really
fantastic.
Sorry to interrupt you.
There's an image from promotional material of like 3 of them and some bushes. I don't like that image, and that's like always the first thing that comes to mind. So I'm always kind of like, I don't like the Pachycephalosaurus in Jurassic Park that much. Wrong.
Can you send
liar?
It?
Yeah, I can send it in a moment. And I also, I couldn't communicate why I don't like this image because they're cute, they're kind of charming, and they're just in a bush. But I just don't like it.
It is also animatronic in the scene where they let it out of the cage.
I completely forgot they do that.
Yeah.
This is just more of my flawed memory of the film. So thank you for pointing that out.
Sorry, I had to snipe that.
No, it's good that you did that because now it won't happen in the comments. It still will, but I'll feel less bad about it. I accidentally put it in slow motion.
That is not the most flattering angle on these guys.
It really isn't.
But I really do like this design a lot. I think it's a great Pachycephalosaurus design, especially like a 90s Pachycephalosaur. There's like minor bits and bobs you would tweak on this, but really there's no like humongous flaws. The thing I like maybe the least is just the texture of the dome, which looks a bit too much like a cracked eggshell for my taste. But I think kind of like James, there's something about it that I can't quite push it past the S threshold, and I don't know why, but it's definitely a high A.
All right. Well, with that, Pachycephalosaurus will go, once I find it. Ah, there it is. Pretty solidly up in A tier. Very nice.
All right. Are we ready to spin the wheel? I don't know why I intoned it. I had to buffer for a moment in my own brain.
I sure am.
Alrighty, buddy. Oh, geez. Alrighty, buddy.
Alrighty, buddy. It's
Alrighty, buddy.
It's midnight. All right.
And it's time.
It's time.
All right, everybody. It's time to
spin
that
wheel.
Oh my god.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh no.
Okay.
What do you mean? Oh no. We've been wanting more theropods for so long.
Now we've got 2.
There are 2 designs.
Oh yes, there are. Inside you, there are 2 Giganotosaurus.
Well, you know what, Scott?
They're very big.
We'll be back to you on the edit wheel by then. So, God be with you.
Indeed.
All right. So join us next time for our discussion of Giganotosaurus. I'm pleased to say, for a little peek behind the curtain, that we are finally ahead again with recordings, and that this video will drop, I think, a full month after we record it, which is really exciting.
Love that.
That's good for us. Yeah, it's really good news. Anyway, this is the part of the video where we thank the people who support us financially so that we can keep making videos. And while I'm fairly glib in the way that I say that right now, I do want to say that we all really, really appreciate the support we get, because we really would not be able to justify continuing to take the time to make content at this frequency, content of this length, if we didn't have such amazingly generous support from our audience. And so if you want to support our mission with science communication, please consider supporting us on Patreon if you can. Otherwise, just thank you for watching, and just leave a like and a comment on the video. It helps us find new viewers. So we appreciate it if you do that as well. As of recording, our most generous patrons at Gorgosaurus tier and higher include Benjamin Seepser, nickname, original username, Philip Fico, AK92, Christopher Bellis Jones, Aaron Anderson, Adamolos, Camphibia, Dan O'Kyrus, Dinodom, King Zashu, Max Ironpaw, Pythonic, Wanderer, and Wheat. So thank you all so very much for your extremely generous support of the channel. Thank you also to all of our other patrons for your continued support. We couldn't do it without each and every one of you, and we really do appreciate you all very much.
Yes.
So thank you again. We will see you next time for our what is assuredly going to be a very, very long video about what
The big
is it
southern
again?
lizard.
Oh yes, the big southern lizard. That one. So yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Both of them.
Both of them. It was in Jurassic World Dominion, and as a spoiler alert, I think it looked bad there.
Joker of dinosaurs.
And it was the Joker of dinosaurs.
One of my favorite TikToks is just a guy being, what did he mean by that? What did he mean by that?
Dalton, what your tweet, just we live in a braided river system. really. I think about that constantly. That was a good tweet. That was really funny. Anyway, thank you all. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye.